I want you to hit me as hard as you can.
The year was 2008. The film was Iron Man. The world had seen a re-emergence of comic book films thanks to Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight franchise, showing that you could take these characters seriously and people would show up. Yet questions remained. Sure, people would show up for a character as iconic as Batman, but would they also take the time to get to know the more obscure characters without mainstream recognition? In today's world, some 13 years later, we think about the Marvel Cinematic Universe as one of the greatest and most enduring cinematic endeavors ever attempted. But, at the time, it was an unprecedented move. So, we here at JoBlo Videos have selected our picks for the 10 best Marvel Cinematic Universe films.
Thanks for watching the JoBlo Top 10. If you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. Now, back to the show.
Number 10. Black Panther. We kick things off with the first superhero film to ever be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. The film, written and directed by the incredibly talented Ryan Coogler, who was coming off of the massive success of his Rocky reboot, Creed, said that he agreed to directing the film because he grew up reading the comics and felt the film would be incredibly personal for him. He also gave Marvel mastermind Kevin Feige a stipulation. If he came on board to direct, he needed to bring his own team with him so that his film had a different feel than the other Marvel movies. Chadwick Boseman was hired for the role without even having to audition. He simply met with Marvel and told them his intentions for the character, and they hired him. That in of itself tells you all you need to know about Chadwick Boseman. At that point in his career, he wasn't a household name yet, but he went into a meeting and took charge the way only the King of Wakanda could. And here lies the genius of what Marvel did with their characters. They didn't just throw them at you and say, "Here, you'll watch this because we are Marvel." They smartly wove them into already established franchises to lay the groundwork so that when their solo movie came along, the audience already had a familiarity with the character. Such was the case when we were introduced to Black Panther in Captain America: Civil War, a supporting appearance that only made the audience hungry for more. But the real strength of Black Panther lies with its villain, Eric Stevens, aka Killmonger, played to perfection by Michael B. Jordan. At this point, the MCU had taken a lot of flack for their villains being a bit one-dimensional, but Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger was not some big CGI character hell-bent on destroying the world. He was simply a man who felt betrayed by his own family. He also delivers one of the best lines in the entire MCU.
Just bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
The film managed to break several box office records on its way to pulling in a stellar $1.3 billion worldwide. And what more can be said about Chadwick Boseman and his performance in this film? It was perfect and will be one that is remembered 20, 30, 50 years from now. Sadly, we lost Boseman in 2020, but I'm sure the film's sequel, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, scheduled for release in November 2022, and the Wakanda TV series on Disney Plus will find a way to continue the powerful legacy he left behind. Number 9. SpiderMan Homecoming. This film had a bit of an uphill climb from its inception. As audience members, we had already seen the Spider-Man story play out in 2 different iterations. The Sam Raimi directed, Tobey Maguire starring original franchise from the early 2000s, and the less successful Mark Webb directed Andrew Garfield starring Amazing Spider-Man series from the 2010s. Audiences were rightfully a bit weary about shelling out their hard-earned money to watch more of the same. But again, Marvel did it right. They introduced the character in Civil War as a way to show the audience this Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland, was a different version than we had seen before. I think the film's true strength lies in its comedy. Marvel movies have sometimes gotten a reputation for trying to force in one-liners to bring some levity to their films, but Spider-Man Homecoming brought actual comedy to the mix, whether it was the awkward interaction of the school's morning news team or the cameos by Captain America. The film had genuine comedy. And again, this film had a great villain. this time played by the always phenomenal Michael Keaton, trading in his bat suit for vulture wings. His bad guy had a great reason for existing. A blue-collar worker who loses everything when the government comes in and takes over. Forced to find another way to make ends meet, he turns to arms dealing as a way to continue to provide for his family. Keaton said that is what drew him to the role. He doesn't have dreams of world domination. He is a simple man who just wants a shot at the good life. This film's sequel, Spider-Man Far From Home, was released 2 years after this film and was a solid follow-up that ended on one of the best cliffhangers the MCU has seen, with the world learning Spider-Man's true identity. And Spider-Man No Way Home, coming in December 2021, appears to pick up directly where that film left off. Anticipation for this threequel is through the roof, with the trailer already racking up over 73 million views on YouTube. Number 8. AntMan. This one had a bit of a tumultuous journey to the big screen. Originally superfan Edgar Wright was brought on to write and direct the film. However, his vision didn't quite mesh with Marvel's and he left the project, having retained a story by and screenplay credit on the final film. From there, director Peyton Reed was brought in, whose biggest films to that point were the comedies Bring It On, The Breakup, and Yes Man. I do believe my tastes skew heavily towards comedy, as this film is another great example of how to mix the genres of action and comedy perfectly. This is another entry in the MCU that is genuinely funny, and a lot of that is because of Paul Rudd. I think the one thing that Marvel does better than anybody else is casting. Every time I hear of who is cast in a new Marvel project, I think to myself, yeah, they nailed that. And even for people I may not be familiar with prior to their casting, like a Tom Holland as Spider-Man, once you see the film, you realize Marvel knows exactly what they're doing. So with Rudd on board, he brought in his pal and Anchorman director Adam McKay to help him punch up the script. With the script complete and Reed firmly in the director's chair, it was time to fill out the supporting cast. And again, there's no other way of saying it other than they nailed it. I think Michael Pena comes across as the true MVP of the supporting cast, because every time he is on the screen, I was smiling. The scenes where his character has to retell a story may be some of my favorite scenes in the entire MCU.
Okay, I was at a wine tasting with my cousin Ernesto, which was mainly reds, and you know I don't love reds, man, but there was a rosé that saved the day. It was delightful. And he tells me about this girl, Emily, that we used to kick it with. It was actually the first pair of boobs that I ever touched.
It's the wrong details. It has nothing to do with the story. Go!
The sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp, was also a great follow-up. Coming in between Avengers Infinity War and Endgame provided the film with a mid-credit scene that left people's jaws on the floor, and I cannot wait for 2023 when we get to see the third film in this series, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Number 7. The Avengers. The original mashup of superheroes. This was the 6th film in the MCU, and at the time the most ambitious film they had attempted. Bringing in, at the time, respected filmmaker Joss Whedon, the film was able to successfully conclude Phase 1 of the MCU while also setting the course for Phase 2. The film felt truly epic, with massive destruction, otherworldly villains, and a Hulk, this time played by Mark Ruffalo, replacing Edward Norton from The Incredible Hulk, which led to one of the more comical moments in the film. Avengers would be the first billion-dollar grossing film in the MCU, raking in $1.5 billion worldwide, becoming at the time the third highest grossing movie of all time. It would also be nominated for the Visual Effects Academy Award and be featured on many critics' year-end best-of lists. Number 6. Guardians of the Galaxy. When Guardians of the Galaxy came along, I, like many, had never heard of any of the characters. We had been introduced as guardian gods and de-thawed super soldiers, but would we accept a talking raccoon and a tree that is really into family?
I am Groot.
Yes, we would. And the reason we would is entirely in the hands of filmmaker James Gunn, who at the time was best known for scripting the Scooby-Doo movies. At the time, the film was seen as Marvel's biggest gamble to date, a film filled with mostly unknown characters headed by the fat dude from Parks and Rec. But again, it is the comedy that shined brightest in this film, with several true laugh-out-loud moments.
Oh, she has no idea. If I had a black light, the place would look like a Jackson Pollock painting.
You got issues, Quill.
Ultimately, the film worked because it had a group that after 2 hours, we genuinely cared about. It takes a lot to garner an emotional response when a tree dies, and yet when Groot sacrifices himself, I'm not ashamed to admit, I shed a tear. Although I did tell the people I was with it was just my allergies acting up. Number 5. Iron Man. The OG of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The film that changed the way we watch movies forever, and one of the biggest gambles in cinema history. It's easy now to look back at it and say, of course Iron Man was a hit. How could it not be? But at the time, it was a second-tier comic book character from a completely untested and unproven new movie studio, starring an actor that was deemed unhireable due to his past run-ins with the law. Kevin Feige may be the architect of the MCU, but at the time, the entire potential franchise rested in the hands of the guy who made Elf, Jon Favreau. Favreau originally approached Sam Rockwell to play the titular role. However, after he brought Robert Downey Jr. into screen test, he quickly changed his mind, saying that Downey's past actually mirrored what Tony Stark had to go through in the film. His good and bad attributes out there for the public to see. Marvel had some pushback on this casting choice, but Favreau fought hard for the casting, saying it was his job as director to find the absolute best choice for this role creatively, and that choice was Robert Downey Jr. The film was released on May 2nd, 2008, and quickly became a massive hit, pulling in almost $100 million domestic in its first weekend, on its way to a $585.8 million worldwide take. But it was the part that came after the lights had gone up in the movie theater that would change movie-going forever. At that time, it was not common practice to put a scene after the credits, so when Tony Stark proclaims,
I am Iron Man,
it was perfectly acceptable if you got up to leave the theater without sticking around to see the hundreds of names that helped create the film you just enjoyed. But when you did that, you missed out on an extra scene featuring Samuel L. Jackson playing someone named Nick Fury, a role previously played by David Hasselhoff. That's a true fact. You can look that up. In the scene, Fury tells Tony Stark that there are others like him, and that someone called S.H.I.E.L.D. is putting together an initiative, an Avenger initiative. If you were lucky enough to be in the theater for that scene, you heard one of the biggest cheers you have ever heard in a theater. And after those cheers subsided, you heard everyone else asking, who was that guy and what is an Avenger?
Contrary to your belief, you are not the center of my universe. I have bigger problems than you in the Southwest region to deal with.
13 years later, and the entire world knows exactly what an Avenger is. Number 4. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This is the film I think truly kicked off what the Marvel Cinematic Universe was capable of, and where it was ultimately heading. The previous films all felt like contained movies with pieces of a shared universe, whereas when The Winter Soldier was released, it felt like we were finally seeing some of those pieces connect in order to form a much larger story. Kevin Feige continued his trend of hiring unconventional directors for these films, this time bringing on Anthony and Joe Russo, who at the time were best known for the 2006 film You, Me, and Dupree, as well as TV shows such as Arrested Development and Community. The film's writers, Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, said that it took them some time to decide on the direction of the film, but ultimately settled on a conspiracy film using 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View, and Marathon Man as influences on the script. The strength of the film is that it felt both epic in scope, yet personal in execution. It was a massive epic film that never lost sight of the characters at the heart of the story. At the heart of it was the story of losing someone you deeply care about to a force more powerful than either of you, and fighting to get that person back. Something many of us can relate to. The film would be released on April 4th, 2014, and earned over $714 million worldwide when it was all said and done, with many critics hailing it as the best Marvel film to date, which would lead to Number 3. Captain America, Civil War. The trailer for this one was one of the best trailers the MCU ever created. The way the music swells, the quick shots of Rhodes lying in Tony's arms, the scene where Cap says,
But he's my friend.
and Tony replies,
So was I.
followed by a quick cut of Cap and Bucky beating the hell out of Iron Man. I remember seeing this trailer and saying, I need to see this movie right now. And then the movie was released, and it lived up to the hype. The airport scene is one of the best action pieces of the entire MCU, showcasing how integral characters like Spider-Man, AntMan, and Black Panther were to the series. The conflict between Rogers and Stark always seemed to be there. It was an underlying thing in the earlier Avengers film, right down to their simple stance on the use of profanity.
Shit! Language! No one else is going to deal with the fact that Cap just said language. I know. For gosh sake, watch your language. That's not going away anytime soon.
The thing I think this movie did so well is, it felt like not just a big action film with some of our favorite characters, but a true sequel to The Winter Soldier in its themes of government and trust. When Stark and Rogers are having the conversation about the Sokovia Accords that would allow government oversight of the Avengers, as an audience member you can see both sides of the coin. They didn't make one side crazy to service the other, and that is what makes the script by returning writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely so great. You can tell that they truly understood the characters they were writing. Then you get to that final fight, Captain America versus Iron Man. The acting in the scene is some of the best of the series. When Tony confronts Rogers about whether he knew that Bucky killed his parents, that's Robert Downey Jr. peak form.
Did you know? I didn't know it was him. I just did you know? Yes.
And the ensuing fight was nothing short of epic. The way the Russo brothers and cinematographer Trent Opalak shot that scene, transitioning from wide shots with a slow push to more intimate close-up shots. It is a masterclass in how to film a fight scene. The film would go on to make over $1.1 billion at the worldwide box office, becoming the highest-grossing film of 2016. Number 2. Avengers Infinity War. This is part 1 of the 2-part conclusion to the Infinity Saga. The film finds the saga's big bad, Thanos, played brilliantly by grown-up Goonie Josh Brolin, as he continues searching the galaxy for the Infinity Stones so that he can eliminate half of all life on Earth as a way to save the planet from decimating their natural resources due to overpopulation. I mean, when you look at it like that, was Thanos really all that bad? I guess it reminds me of the phrase, "The path to hell is paved with good intentions." The film gets the number 2 spot on the list because the ending has gone down as one of the biggest cliffhangers in movie history. Thanos gets the stones, and with a single snap we see half of our favorite characters just turn to ash and fly away in the wind. Seeing Peter Parker fade away while saying,
"Stark, I don't feel so good,"
and collapsing into his arms, the audience in the theater had a collective sigh. And what makes that scene so great, if I may be a tech nerd for a moment, the sound design of that entire final scene is nothing short of masterful. The film received several Academy Award nominations, but how it was not nominated for Best Sound Design is beyond me. I love that the directors decided to go without a score for that entire final scene. Just the sound of fire, wind, thunder, and the bodies as they turn to dust. Absolutely perfect.
He did it.
Number 1, Avengers Endgame. And here we are, the best movie of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because this is the culmination of all 21 films. It felt like a television series finale. You spend all these years with these characters, and you know it is all leading somewhere, and you hope that when it gets there, it makes the time you spent watching everything worth it. Some shows don't always stick that landing.
I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and I work all day.
But Avengers Endgame nailed it.
I see this as an absolute win.
Many people pointed out that after the initial shock of the ending of Infinity War, it had less of an impact because you knew these characters were coming back. Hell, there was already a new SpiderMan movie set to be released just 2 months later. But how they came back was the big mystery. And if you haven't seen the movie, well, I'm going to spoil it for you. They got the stones back by using time travel and quantum mechanics, and other stuff that smarter people than I will have to explain. Give them to Hulk, who's decided to have the most resistance to radiation, naturally. He uses the gauntlet to snap all those disintegrated people back into existence. At the time, it was also widely known that this film would be Robert Downey Jr.'s and Chris Evans' last Marvel film, with fans speculating on whether or not the two characters would meet their ends in the film. And this is why the ending of the movie is so damn perfect. Tony Stark sacrifices himself to take out Thanos. We then get the funeral scene with one of the best camera shots of the entire series as we weave between all the characters we have come to know, including the kid from Iron Man 3, in one of the most emotional scenes of the last 15 years. So, now we know how the story of Tony Stark ends. But Steve Rogers is still alive. How do we say goodbye to him? By bringing it all back to the very first Captain America movie. Rogers volunteers to take the Infinity Stones and return them to their proper timelines, and in doing so decides to go return to 1942 and live out the remainder of his years with the one true love of his life, Peggy Carter. Returning moments later, an elderly man with a lifetime of beautiful memories.
It's beautiful.
And passing the shield on to its rightful heir, Sam Wilson. It was a perfectly beautiful and emotional ending for the character, and a truly genius way to retire the Steve Rogers character while allowing Captain America to live on. And as they say, it's not how you start, but how you finish. And with Avengers Endgame, the Marvel Cinematic Universe finished its Infinity Saga, all 11 years and 22 films of it, incredibly strong. And that is the JoBlo Top 10 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. I hope you agree with our list, but if not, I look forward to reading your own list in the comments section. Thanks for watching. Until next time.